Tonight I've been asked to share with you a little bit about my dad's impact upon the family, which, intentional or not, was a rather existential question for me, since I have no frame of reference for any other family or my own existence without my dad. But I will endeavor, as you have heard from others tonight, and will continue to, about Dad's impact upon evangelicalism and the world at large, I will speak to you in the only way that I'm qualified, and will attempt to share with you on a more micro level about my parents from the perspective of a daughter. One other caveat I'd like to add is that I had no intention of doing anything like this until decades in the far distant and tragic future, when perhaps I'd be eulogizing my dad. But in that instance, he was not going to be right in front of me, eyes open and fact-checking. So here we are. It's incredible for me to think back 25 years to when my parents first arrived on this campus. I only recently realized that they were just a couple years older than Riley and I are now, with their own two adorably, impeccably behaved children in tow, just a little older than ours are now. To put myself in their shoes then, and to think about all the trials and challenges that lay before them at this stage of life with such young children, it makes me want to just pack it up and turn around. And it's only with the perspective of all these years and all that God has done through them and the many ways he's blessed this institution that I can more fully look back and appreciate and respect the endurance and sacrifices of my parents. God's many providences are sometimes strange to us, and that was certainly the case for my parents, who longed for children for years before the Lord gave us to them. But in his kindness, that meant that when we arrived on this campus, we were just little children of 1 and 4, and we had no idea of what was going on around us. God spared us from childhood memories of our father being burned in effigy, and we are forever thankful for that. That said, there certainly are trials that we can remember, whether it was walking outside on Christmas Eve to find obscenities scrawled in our snow, or the off-duty police officer that was in our driveway sometimes, or stories like Dad shared there about just clearly knowing my parents were going through a difficult time, coming to the understanding that not everyone loved my dad like I did, but some seemed to really hate him. And though we didn't understand why, we understood that the times were really hard. And we knew that Dad found some of his greatest earthly comfort in the love and support of his family, most specifically in my mom. And it's through those early days that I got my first lessons on what a godly and supportive Christ-like marriage looks like, and I'm so grateful for that. But by his grace, I have immeasurably more happy memories here. Christopher and I used to get in the car a couple times after school, a couple times a year after school, and ask Mom how many people didn't shake Dad's hand at graduation. That was our barometer for how things were going. Always had keen insights. Those numbers began to shrink until the question just went away altogether. One of God's many other kindnesses during that time was the addition of so many faithful faculty and staff members that came to join in the mission here. They were such a buoy and encouragement to my parents, and they, many of you and your families, became like family to us. And it's for that and so many other reasons that I can look back on my childhood as the happiest and have a deep and abiding love for this institution. I'm trying to remember where I was going to go after this. I will get there. My mom has made sure that this was always a job for our entire family. My parents instilled that for us from the very beginning. Christopher and I were always posted out front in our finest attire from the very beginning, welcoming trustees and others that came to our home for the myriad events that were happening there throughout every year, which gives me pause to remember how my mom and the ministry of hospitality and gratitude is not a new thing for her. From the very beginning, opening the doors of our home has been one of her greatest joys, and an overflow from her heart of gratitude towards the Lord, towards those who he had brought to join us in this mission, and of just thankfulness to him. And as my dad has testified and will continue to, nothing that God has allowed him to do on this campus would have been possible in the same way without my mom and the love and sacrifices she's put in here over those same years. She's his strongest encourager, his fiercest defender, and she loves the gospel in this institution just as much as my dad does. No one will ever fully be able to understand the kingdom work he's allowed to go on here through the work of my mom and her sacrifices towards this institution and in our serving our family. Most notably, perhaps, is her helping to found the Seminary Wives Institute over 20 years ago now, meeting an unmet need she saw for seminary wives to be trained and equipped for ministry alongside their husbands. People used to ask me a lot growing up, what was it like? I still get that question. And it often revolved around how many books Dad read or how much sleep he got that night. But I like to think about what other kind of urban myths are out there about our upbringing. Surely in the Mohler home, it was nightly sword drills to find our favorite Bible verses, or theology bees on the weekend to brush up on our hermeneutics and exegesis. While my parents certainly taught us much about God's Word, and we did our fair share of analyzing news and events from a Christian worldview, there's just some questions you're embarrassed to ask when your dad's the smartest man you'll ever meet. I found myself as a young teenager in somewhat of a crisis of faith. How was it possible that God had told Adam and Eve that if they ate of the fruit, they would die? And yet they didn't die, they had children, the whole Bible continues, and no one seems to have a problem with this. I did. And you might say, well, you had the reigning intellectual of the evangelical movement sitting next to you at the dinner table. But I was kind of embarrassed to ask this question, maybe bring down Christendom, and just, I didn't get it. So I did what anyone in my position would do. I created a false identity and submitted a question to that same theologian's Ask Anything Wednesday radio program. Dad answered my question, cleared up the fact that it wasn't like a poison fruit that immediately brought death to those that ate it, but in fact, in Adam and Eve's sin, death entered the world. Got it, cleared it up. He came home that night and I said, you know, Dad, that was a really insightful question that Kathy asked, wouldn't you say? Well, no, it's a dumb question. So in that moment, I was really affirmed in the method I had chosen to ask the question. And in this moment, I think I'm exposing myself as the real Kathy for the very first time. So it was not characteristic of the way my dad answered many and still does continue to answer my questions. He taught me so much about loving the Lord, whether in our home or from the pulpit or even from the classroom. My very first college class was at age 15 when I took his worldviews class at Boyce College. To this day, if I encounter a passage of scripture, I, again, don't really understand what's going on, one of the first commentaries I often turn to is Google, and I type in the passage in Mohler and hope that Dad's written something on it, because he is truly the Bible teacher that I trust the most. He's taught me incalculable other things about life, and it's deeply true that I have no frame of reference for who I would be without my dad's impact upon my life. For better or worse, we share the same sense of humor, and now seems like a great time to tell you that he has an incredible sense of humor. He also has a keen ability to laugh at himself, which is a skill Christopher and I have helped him to hone, especially over these last decades. He passed on to me his love of history and politics. Like him, I majored in that in college. It led me to work in the U.S. Capitol building for several years and opened up a whole new line of communication for us, as he, I think, envisioned what could have been if he had chosen a different path he was interested in, politics. But thanks be to God that he led him elsewhere. But politics and current events have certainly always been a part of the conversation in our home, a lot of the time because of the radio show that was going on. It was so much a part of our lives. That also became a job for our entire family. Christopher worked in the radio show booth as an intern for free. Mom was a guest on the show a few times. I was a cringeworthy guest a couple of other times. But one of the best stories that illustrates my dad's character to me is when I was producing the show when it was being broadcast live from our lake house one summer. There I am, all 15 years of me with my headset, transcribing listener calls and trying to generally assist the host as necessary. Went in a commercial break and Dad needed some more articles printed off, so he prints them off. And as the music is coming back for the show, the printer has not finished its job. So I wanted to cut out the noise. Dad motions to me to unplug the printer. So I sprung into action, I unplugged the printer, and with it, single-handedly unplugged the entire wall outlet and brought down a national radio show. Like, dead air for the longest and agonizing 1 or 2 minutes of my life. I fled the room in horror. I stuck my head in a few minutes later as I heard that the connection being reestablished with the guys in Louisville. They began profusely apologizing to Dad for what appeared to be a satellite failure. I looked at him, he looked at me, and he said, "Don't beat yourself up, guys, it's fine, let's just get rolling." So, again, publicly, my bad, but an example of grace and covering for me from my dad that was not the first or the last. In short, my dad set the bar incredibly high for any man I could ever imagine as my husband or the father of my children. And one of the sweetest moments of my whole life was 5 years ago in Alumni Chapel when he led us in marriage vows as I got to marry the only man that will ever meet the bar that he set. And while I'm talking about my own family, I should remind you that my parents are crazy baby people. And I mean that literally. They are just absolute nutty people when around tiny humans. And that is exponentially increased when they're around our sons, Benjamin and Henry. Now, that love for Grammy and Papa is certainly mutual. Benjamin is probably the only 2-year-old who eagerly likes to listen to a certain podcast because it's hosted by Papa. And now that he's older, likes to talk back and parrot what he's saying. It's adorable and great when he's talking about, killer whales or panda bears. It's entirely different when you hear your 2-year-old try to say transsexual revolution. Or after hearing his grandfather discuss a certain doctrine, from the back seat just starts yelling, "Hell!" repeatedly. So, it's a true story. That aside, being able to see the love and influence of my parents begin to be imprinted on the next generation brings me so much joy. And while I'm speaking about generations, I should also point out there are several people that aren't here tonight who would have loved to be. My grandparents would have been so thrilled to be here tonight. I can only imagine how proud my dad's parents would have been to see this, as the ones that have had the perspective of his entire life until now. And my mom's parents were the most aggressively proud in-laws you've ever met. We used to joke that my grandmother would tell every visiting electrician or phone operator that her son-in-law was president of Southern Seminary. My 2 grandfathers loved Jesus and are now with him in glory, and my dad's mom is not well enough to be here tonight. We are really thankful that my mom's mom is here representing all 4 of them, and they all would have been so incredibly proud to be here. I've heard other ministry kids over the years say that their dad never missed a t-ball game or a soccer game, but he was always there for them. Now, in true Mohler fashion, we never had a soccer game or a t-ball game that he ever could have missed. And yet, I'm sure over the years he missed a thing or two. But I never doubted that my dad was there for me and deeply, deeply loved me. I was always knowing that if he wasn't here, he was there elsewhere doing work that God had ordained for him to do. I was incredibly proud to be able to watch him on Larry King Live, and I thought it was so cool that I could watch him pick out his tie at home and then see it on TV a few minutes later. It's just like truly insider stuff here. But what makes me proudest is to know that that man you see on CNN, or you hear on the briefing, or you see preside in chapel, he's the same man in his own home with his own family. He's the same man after 25 years of the trials and joys of this job. He's the same man when he's out on the lake fishing and he sends Benjamin a video of his catch to show that we serve a creative God who makes beautiful fish. He's the same God, or excuse me, he is the same God, but he's the same dad. Dad is the same man who is supported by my mom all the more 25 years in, who loves her after now 35 years of marriage together. He's the same man who loves the same gospel that's been the bedrock of this institution and his service to it. He's the same man, and I am forever thankful and proud that he's my dad. I pray that he gives you many more years of faithful ministry together as you continue to run the race he set before you. I love you.